Now, the under probably talked to you about our capability portfolio reviews that really drove it, harmonizing and integrating our requirements. That has led us on a path of establishing really this idea of the central delivery of services and going after new business models, which I would really like to have a conversation with our industry partners about, where we're getting things as a service, or maybe even a mix. And all the second and third order effects that comes with that, especially when it comes to supporting operations. Think about the exchange of critical threat information that we will have to have in that hybrid environment so that we both understand the operating landscape so that missions and operations cannot be impacted. The acceleration component of it is key because there's no reason for us to wait for some arbitrary mark on the wall to get after the central delivery of services. If we are providing a capability from the enterprise and we've got Unit X that is out there and they are procuring a similar capability that can be satisfied through the central delivery of services, why wait? And that is what, quite frankly, Army senior leaders are demanding of us at this point. There is no need to wait. If we've identified what the requirement is and we've got a better way to deliver that to the entire Army that gets after this notion of a unified network, that end-to-end visibility that we can maneuver in a contested and congested environment, why wait? And so that's what we're embarking on now. And we've got several initiatives underway that I would be happy to discuss that we're going to execute in 23 and 24 so that as we move into FY25 and start building the next budget, we're making assumptions that we've already accomplished a bunch of work. And so with that, I really look forward to the discussion today. These sessions with our industry partners are absolutely critical because I will tell you the days of the Army building its own capabilities only and deploying them are gone. It will always be a mix of commercial and military unique capabilities, and that's what's going to make us effective, and all of us must be in, because quite frankly, our adversaries are all in. So with that, I look forward to it. Darby, over to you.
Great, thank you, sir. So like we'll pick up on the requirements piece right off the bat. So last year, it was a virtual event, if you guys remember, and we sat in your conference room and kind of got, after I got here, so PTSD walking back in there, I rallied, but you had talked about ICAM in particular and how you were finalizing the requirements data package, and obviously that had some cross-service touch points, and it was being staffed through the, I don't want to say the full JROC process, but there was obviously some JROC coordination, and we've seen a number of RFIs come out, and there's been a number of pilots. What do you see happening around ICAM, like definitive action in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so we still have some work to do on the formal requirement itself. Quite frankly, just because of transitions across the Army and a couple other extringent, reasons, we got a little bit slowed down. Break, but that hasn't slowed down what we're implementing from an ICAM solution. Matter of fact, at the strategic and operational levels, we're accelerating our efforts, principally centered around audit requirements and really getting after that. But principally, I say, but foundationally, because if we're going to move to this notion of zero trust, foundational to that is ICAM. So what will you see over the next 12 to 18 months? We'll just do next 12. You'll see the acceleration of ICAM that really starts getting after the ability to do auditability to strategic and operational levels with a principal focus on our business systems. You will see, especially in the Indo-PACOM AOR, we will start to do tactical level zero trust pilots, but ICAM is obviously foundational to that we will focus on with the First Corps headquarters and the USERPAC headquarters. So we can start extending those zero trust principles from the enterprise, strategic and operational levels down into the tactical levels. That is all married up with what we're doing with the Army data plan and this notion of capabilities that we know we need to iterate and grow, we put in the hands of units, and instead of pulling those back when we're done with an experiment or an exercise, we're going to leave it there. And quite frankly, allow the unit to continue to iterate. I see up on the screen, what are some of the unclassified C3 lessons coming out of the Ukraine? I will tell you principally is that we need to mature an operational capability, and it is providing value added. Leave it with the unit, because that operational demand makes the machine churn much, much faster, and quite frankly leads to a much more refined requirements development and a much more refined, adaptive, and accelerated capability development. And quite frankly, I think the Chief of Staff out of Houston Pack said it best. If you're giving me a capability that I can't do today and I'm 10% better, then I'm 10% better. And now think about it. Next year, you're 15% better, 20% better. But this notion of iterative development is going to be absolutely key. And so I'm very comfortable where we're heading from an ICAM perspective. The ICAM requirements definition package that will come through will help us solidify that requirement. When I say that requirement, it's really going to be that glue that ties what we're doing at strategic operational level and making sure that transcends down to the tactical level. That's the component of it that we're going to make sure that we formalize and we make sure that we're moving in a harmonious manner.
So not to pin you down, but after that kind of 12 months that you just described, right?
To pin me down.
Right.
We're going to be wrestling up here, folks.
But coming on the back end of that, do you see that kind of manifesting itself in a request for proposals so that the industry folks that are watching this, what do you see that kind of being more of a set of an overarching proposal that you're going to kind of hit the different commands based on their unique operational requirements?
Yeah, so unique operational requirements. I almost challenge the notion of this continuously unique operational requirements. There are foundational things that we must do, and then we tailor the one-offs based off the foundational things that we must do. We can't go the other direction where everybody says they're special and different. Right. That won't work if we want to get after, what we really want to get after is this notion of joint all-domain command and control, and take it from being a concept to taking it to being reality. And just the mere notion of unique command requirements takes us away from that. I'm not going to get into the acquisition components of it. I'll leave that to Tony Potts and those folks. What I am going to say is we will have the requirement for formalized here in short order. There'll be that glue that goes from strategic operational to tactical. Keep your eyes on what EIS is doing at strategic and operational level, because it is moving at a pretty good clip even today, because we have to get after setting the foundation for the unified network. And ICAM, if you're going to build zero trust principles into that notion, is absolutely the foundational thing we must do. And then we're going to start extending those kind of capabilities into the tactical space.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now kind of moving into the tactical space a bit, what are your thoughts, as we talk about tactical cloud, and as you get further down towards the tactical edge, you've got the command post. In the past, we've kind of overcome things by bringing more and more servers down to the tactical edge. So, as we try to work our way through, I know there's a couple of pilots and experimentation going on with very specific units, but what are your thoughts? It's not an easy thing to solve, but what are your kind of thoughts about how we work our way through that?
I think it's a pragmatic thing to solve, right? And, we've got to be careful about not overcomplicating something. And so I push back on the notion of tactical cloud. Because, again, where we don't want to look at things is strategic, operational, and tactical. We want to look at a hybrid cloud architecture that includes our tactical formations that are deployed, right? That allows us to leverage the power of the cloud, but really the implementation of cloud capabilities and all that comes with the security and the benefits and the operational benefits you get from containerization and virtualization, etc., right? That's what we want to get after. And there's an implementation for that in a tactical environment that we're going to have to work our way through. Now, I emphasize this notion of hybrid cloud. So moving to the cloud is very definitely an Army priority. Do not get me wrong with what I'm about to say. However, the work that we must do from an Army perspective are what are those key capabilities that we want to maintain on-prem, I'll say. And on-prem can be whether we're doing it at the strategic and operational levels back in garrison, or on-prem can be what we're keeping in a cloud environment that's in the tactical space. We've got to work our way through that, and quite frankly, that's a journey we're just beginning. But think critical data that in the hands of an adversary can disrupt, degrade, or quite frankly, stop what we want to do from a military perspective. Think critical mission command capabilities. So you're not going, we, the United States Army, are not going to push all those capabilities into the cloud and go, we're now going to go into a contested and contested environment, and we're going to rely on everything that's up in the cloud. There's got to be that balance. And that balance is what we are trying to strike, right? So what do we need to have residents inside a command post? At echelon. What I will tell you is pushing everything into a brigade combat team, those days are gone, right? We cannot afford to operate that way operationally, because we just induce so much complexity into a divisional formation that it just will make a G6's head spin. And two, we can't afford it fiscally, so why do it? Right? So a smart layering of that is what we're working our way through. We have already demonstrated through Project Convergence, other exercises out in the Indo-PACOM, and quite frankly, operation, that this hybrid tactical architecture for cloud is where we want to head. We have demonstrated that. We feel comfortable with that. What we need to work our way through is now that echelon. So we're starting pretty pragmatically. We're going to focus on the core as that integrator for the joint fight from an Army perspective and figure out what that looks like. Then we're going to enable the division to really be that unit of action and enable division maneuver. And then we'll figure out what the lower echelons need. But the capabilities and the complexities have got to be layered appropriately. I bring you back to the unified network and it being an operational framework. LOE 2 is all about posturing the signal and cyber forces for multi-domain operation. So as you do that layering, quite frankly, we push masses of bodies down into the BCTs to align to all the capabilities we have pushed down. If we raise that complexity up, we've got to go back in and rebalance the people so we align them appropriately against where the complexity and the capabilities really reside. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great, sir. Yeah, I think that gives us a good indication of where we're going and what we're doing. So, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on some of the, I know there's been lots of discussions around mobile and bring your own device and voice modernization, getting phones off desk, and all these things that are kind of taken for granted in industry or in the mainstream of America. And I'm not throwing rocks, I have to call it for a reason too.
First we were wrestling, now we're throwing rocks.
But any thoughts? I know there's some initiatives that are underway and some the direction you want to go. Some thoughts around mobile and some of the voice modernization.
Yeah, so I will tell you that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught not just the Army, but the entire Department of Defense some very, very valuable lessons. First off, that mobility is like really important. Mobility increases production, not decreases it. And last but not least, you can do mobility in a secure manner. So we are moving out smartly in quite a few fronts. You call them pilots, I call them rolling starts towards implementation. We have the VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure pilot that's being run by our site at AFCEA. Right now, it's relatively small. We've got about 200, 250 trailblazers that are in it. The reason it is relatively small is because we're eating our own dog food, making sure we've got all the operational TTPs in place so that as we bring additional users onto the network, both from an on-prem perspective, because we want to use virtualization wherever we possibly can, instead of buying a bunch of thick clients, and from a mobility perspective, that we, just like we did for Army 365 and some of our other initiatives, we've got it wired tight and we can move at speed. And I'll just give you the simple example. So Defense Enterprise email took us how many years to make that transition? Right? And I would submit to you, it's because, and lessons learned, you can look backwards, so nobody's being brilliant here, but it's because we didn't have trailblazers that had all those TTPs wired, and we did it from a variety of locations, and we had worked out the vast majority of the snags. Now flip it to Army 365, and you're talking weeks, right? Same approach. So 200 users in the environment today. Boy, let's have the discussion next year when we come back for IT Day, how many folks we have in the environment. And it certainly won't be in the hundreds. I feel very comfortable where that's at. Bring your own device where you can actually do things on your own device, much like you do in industry, in a secure manner, tying back into the node. A couple thousand users on it. And I see that going up into the tens of thousands of users here over the next several weeks. And then we will do the appropriate business and operational case to make sure, is that really the way we want to head? You know, but right now, very, very promising, and late as this week, we have offered it up to senior leaders across the Army. Hey, if you want to start coming on board, come on board again. Putting trailblazers in the environment, working through the TTPs, making sure we've got it right, eating our own dog food first, and then we can move it at a really good clip. So, very comfortable we're heading with mobility. I will tell you, we're even doing that with our secure environments, where we are laying in a very, very secure environment, but laying in a ways to do that that is far better than how we've approached things in the past. Because mobility is very, very important. And these concepts are just not for garrison use. I'm using the term garrison very deliberately. I believe they will transcend to what we're doing in the tactical space. Because if you really want to get after this notion of being transport agnostic, you got to put all this back-end capability in that is, again, a hybrid cloud that will allow us to move at a really good clip and have operational outcomes that we really want in a contested environment.
Thanks, sir. But I don't feel like from a software or an application standpoint, there's a number of software standards that are heavily used. I'll pick on myself for one that puts me out there, this day, like we enable personal mobile, right, so that soldiers can do routine tasks routinely. Whatever we have, fight significant amount of regulation policy, you see that kind of opening up so that soldiers can get into their various applications, whether it's with their personal devices in a secure manner.
First off, I think you're tracking the progress with AFCEA, so my hat's off to you for your leadership when you were in uniform, because we're about to end up in a much better spot in the very near future, so thank you. I'll offer a couple different thoughts, but I want to tie it back to our effort for cybersecurity reform. Again, the unified network is a framework. One of the big ones is getting after policies that get in your way, and then reforming those policies so you can move forward much smarter. We started with the Risk Management Framework 2.0. I will tell you, in some regards, we met the enemy, and the enemy is us. Change is hard if you go first, right? As we put that out, we were relatively slow on adoption. We made a very concerted effort. Matter of fact, I'm not even calling it RMF 2.0. It's really Cybersecurity Reform 2.0 because it is holistic. It is not only how we do the risk management framework process and going after the right controls, not all the controls, moving away from a legacy die-cap process, and then most importantly, shifting those resources away from doing bureaucratic processes to actual cybersecurity operations. This is not an efficiency drill. Please, don't anybody ever think that. This is all about an effectiveness drill of how we actually get after this notion of cybersecurity operations underpinned by continuous monitoring. On the network side, we are in a really good spot. We are aligning authorities from both a DACO, a Directive Authority for Cyberspace Operations, with authorizing official components of it. That's being led by Chris Eubank. You can ask him about that later. And we have now moved hundreds of systems into continuous monitoring on the network side, where it will be a continuous ATO because we have them appropriately censored. And when something goes out of compliance, we deal with it, we document it, we move on. software. That's the next hilltop we gotta go to. That's the next ridge line. How do we do that now from an applications and a systems perspective, not just from a network perspective, and really get after this notion of moving away from the very laborious ATOs that quite frankly take years to get through, and move into something that's much more rhythmic and continuous, a continuous ATO, that allows you to get after continuous improvement and continuous development. We are working with our ASOL teammates on a series of pilots, both from a business and from a mission command perspective, of how do we align our resources so that we really don't think of this notion of software and sustainment anymore. It is all about CI/CD, continuous improvement, continuous development. So we iterate over time, because software, unless you're making a conscious decision, never dies. It must always continuously adapt. Quite frankly, forget the operational piece of it, because the threat always adapts. And so we always have to be continuously adapting. We're going to pick out a few systems that we are going to focus our energies on over the next year. And again, I don't see these as pilots per se, though you'll hear that term. This is really a rolling start towards, quite frankly, getting after the authorities that we already have to implement this model, and not living on previous models and previous thought patterns to get after it. And you'll see that starting to roll here again over the next 6 to 12 months at a pretty good clip.
Okay, thank you, sir. Can you talk a little bit about some of
Are you talking later today? Yeah, you can ask Tony Potts about that too.
Okay. I'll be careful with that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the, and I know, you mixed here and a few others, but can you talk a little bit about some of your initiatives? We've heard lots of different statements and discussions around Army data centers and some of the standardization across the next. I know there's been some standardization that's definitely happened that's really going well. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
So I'm not going to use the term standardization, because I think that's a misnomer. When you use the term standardization, it goes to one size fits all, and it's sort of like in years past where we tried to standardize our command posts. You can standardize the command post all day long, but you can't standardize commanders, because everybody needs to see information different. But there are core capabilities that we want to put in place that then you can tailor based off of the needs of what the commander needs to see. I'm going to break this into two parts. One, I'm going to break it into a unified network perspective, and then I do want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the Army data plan. Because you can't separate data from the network from the operational outcomes. You just cannot do it. So from a unified network perspective, we are moving towards this notion of central delivery of services. And we are going to centrally put those services underneath Army Cyber as the operator of the Army's Department of Defense Information Network. We're going to essentially do that, because we have one person that's responsible for the operations, maintenance, security, and defense, and quite frankly, the maneuvering of the DOD and supportive operations, and that's Army Cyber. That's going to harmonize and accelerate, again, implementation and acceleration, our movement towards this notion of unified NetOps. Now, there is a unified NetOps requirements documents out there. We've got the ICAM, RDP, and several other ones that are going to be coming behind it that are going to significantly increase our ability to do three things. One is going to align capabilities on echelon throughout our Army, strategic, operational, all the way down to the tactical edge. Two, it's going to help us align our force structure from strategic, operational, all the way down to the tactical edge. And then the third most important thing is going to think about what it just did to our training. So right now, if I take somebody out of a BCT and I even put them up at Corps, it's going to be different. And certainly if I take somebody from a Corps and I put them in a regional cyber center, the look and feel is going to be different. Now we're going to have that commonality all the way up and down the chain. So we're starting with things like our help desks. I'm not even going to tell you how many help desks we have in the United States Army. But we're going to do tier 0 and tier 1 do Army Cyber and NetCom, and then let functionals tailor for those other specific things they need to do, things they say, outside of it. So it's a much more pragmatic. We are getting after unified scene right now so that we can respond to events in the totality of the network, no matter what echelon it's at, strategic, operational, and tactical. And that's the stuff that we're doing right now. But again, it's all through the central delivery of capabilities that we're moving towards. Now, here's the other part of it. I know I'm getting a little bit off track and then I want to get to the Army data plan, but I think it's important. Some of that is as a service. Some of that is we're going to build it and take it with us, but it will tie back in. And some of it's going to be hybrid even into the tactical echelons, meaning as a service capabilities impacting what operational formations and contact may be doing. Think about what a different model that is for all of us to think our way through. We have to understand each other's security practices. We have to understand how we're going to hand off incidents depending on what side of the infrastructure it may be on. We're going to have to figure out ways in a much more agile and adaptive and faster way to share threat information. Because we're going to be reliant on each other. So the second and third order things that we as a broader community on behalf of our nation need to work are fairly significant. And we're going to need to think our way through it. Especially as it starts extending into conducting tactical operations. You know, I think on the enterprise and strategic side, I mean, this could be relatively straightforward, but boy, the nuance is going to be when it actually touches the tactical environment. So we talked about this hybrid cloud that will be both on-prem at strategic and operational levels, and then on-prem at the tactical level, same. Because the data that you need may reside in different locations as we start laying in what that architecture truly looks like. So that's a challenge for everybody in the room that we are all going to need to work our way through. I find it exciting and filled with opportunity and promise, but transparency, being very, very candid, thinking operationally are going to be very, very critical to that endeavor. Break, moving that to the Army data plan. So you've heard me talk about it before, a razor focus on what we're trying to do to echelon those kind of capabilities to enable data and faster decision making and decision dominance in support of multi-domain ops on the Indo-PACOM AOR. A team going out this week to start working through the use cases. We are going to focus first on how do we rapidly evolve a ability to do a log cop out in the Indo-PACOM AOR. We're going to do it based off the capabilities that we had out of Project Convergence 22. We're going to leave them in place with UserPack and First Corps, and we're going to iterate so that we can figure out that echelonment and what does this new operating model really look like. You know, and it will be through a series of exercises that are ongoing, but I would submit to you it will also probably extend into just day-to-day operations. You know, as UserPack interacts with Indo-PACOM and all the advantages of getting a geographic combatant commander putting operational demands down onto an AFCEA. And we will continue our efforts that we're doing with 18th Airborne Corps so that we've got a couple different places that we're learning from. And then we will have AFC, Army Futures Command, inject appropriately so that we can, between the two approaches that we're taking, figure out what's going to be the big Army application so that we can proliferate it. But again, it's about setting that foundation that is common to all, but leaving that ability to tailor based off of how the operational environment changes or based off of how a commander needs to actually see information to achieve the decision dominance. And I apologize for the diatribe there, but I think that it was a couple of really important points to hit. And hopefully it spurs a couple more questions.
Well, I think that brings us right to about time, right, Steve? Unless we've got a few minutes.
We got a couple more minutes.
Okay. Keep going. Like you gave me the cover.
That concludes my session today. Thank you. Wow, you ready for me to go that quick? I wasn't expecting that.
It's got a copy time. So, shifting gears a little bit, what do you see some of the, I know there's some of this going on, quite a bit of it at Aberdeen, and others in the EAS, but the network CFT. But what do you see kind of going down over the next 12 to 18 months around 5G and wireless? There's a lot of initiatives from a lot of different organizations and various different echelons and parts of the Army that are kicking this around. What are your thoughts there?
So I'll offer a couple of thoughts. So, you know, I actually, from a wireless perspective, I feel like we're heading in a pretty good trajectory, right? Whether it's a tactical implementation of wireless, so we quit running wires all over a talking, taking hours and hours and hours to get it established, et cetera. I feel like we're heading in the right direction. With one caveat. You know, as we start thinking about what the command posts of the future look like, and I saw some of the Ukrainian, you know, what unclassified things can we talk about? I'll give you a big one. You know, having a large brigade combat team TOC that takes hours to set up and move is not in our future. Small distributed nodes that are connected is in our future. Very highly mobile, able to hide in plain sight, and able to rapidly shift functions between those nodes, given what is happening in what is going to be from a spectrum perspective, especially highly contested and congested, is in our future. Working through what wireless, whether it is traditional line of sight, or whether it is 5G, or whether it is advanced wireless, working that component forward is something that we've got some more work to do. But inside our current infrastructure, I feel very comfortable. We are actually conducting some efforts down at Fort Belvoir to see what wireless on an installation would look like, as opposed to our traditional approach of, hey, let's go to the switch cabinet and run a bunch of wires to the desktop. What does that look like? Again, getting at this notion of mobility. What we will work over the next 12 to 18 months is infusing 5G as it matures into that calculus. Now, what I asked the team to do the other day is sort of separate it a little bit, because you can implement 5G without being connected to the broader 5G commercial infrastructure, because there is a little bit of a disconnect between those two. So what does that look like as we're moving forward, as opposed to the traditional, we're going to go put wireless in the building with all the wireless intrusion capabilities that go with it, etc. Because I think it'll look different. And so we'll get after that in the next 12 months. And then as the commercial infrastructure catches up, we will figure out how we plug into it. You'll continue to see from a land mobile radio perspective the continued integration with 5G moving forward here over the next year. Matter of fact, we're on the final throes of formalizing a holistic requirements document for all things emergency communications that we're pretty excited about, that will get us away from the baling wire and duct tape approach that we've used to land mobile radios in the past. So I think that's also very.
So that's a huge breakthrough. That's been discussed for a number of years.
It has, and there's been a lot of spade work that's been done on the part of the requirements community. But what I find most promising about that is that the acquisition community has been embedded from the start. So this will actually be a running start. It won't be the traditional. It'll build off a lot of the work that's been done organically inside Army Cyber, IMCOM, and other organizations. It'll build off that and then rapidly move us into something to where we'll be able to continuously modernize it over the course of time.
And I would imagine it's important to keep that effort, obviously connected with FirstNet and others.
It's central to our implementation of FirstNet. Central to it.
Okay, sir. Well, I think we've hit time. I've got the signal from the esteemed Steve Buck. But we really appreciate you joining us today. Appreciate your insight.